Welcome. I am Mr. Clock, the creator of the Arma 3 Object Builder add-on for Blender. In this video, I would like to talk about the Validation 2 panel. When creating complex model assets for Arma, we need to use a good number of different specific LOD types. These are very easy or, well, relatively easy to model, but many of these types actually require specific rules to be true in order to work properly in game. So this 2 panel was created to make it easier to validate certain mesh objects in Blender or the specific LOD types to catch errors that might have occurred during the modeling process. If you look at the documentation page of the validation tool and scroll down, you can see that I actually listed all the rule sets that are present in the plugin currently. The process description here says that for every LOD type, at least the generic rule set, which is the first one here, is run. And then for special LOD types, they are subject to their specific rule sets. So let's see what they actually mean. The generic rule set means that it will throw errors if the mesh contains n-gons, or has materials with non-ASCII characters, or vertex groups with non-ASCII characters, or name properties with non-ASCII characters, or has proxies with non-ASCII character paths, and it will throw a warning if the mesh has more than 2 UV channels. So this rule set will be run on all objects regardless of the LOD type. And then all the subsequent specific rule sets are only for the specific LOD types. So to actually see this in action, I created a bunch of example models which all exhibit basically all of the errors that can be made with a specific type. So let's see. I have created this object, which is a visual LOD, and if we check, this is a resolution 1. So let's validate this object. It says the validation failed. Now, by default, this is all we can see, that it says validation failed, and they check the logs in the system console. The system console in Blender is by default hidden. On Windows, you can toggle with the toggle system console option in the window. If you are on Linux, you will have to launch Blender from a terminal to see this. This option does not exist on Linux. So if you click on the console, we can see the error output of the validation. So let's see what it says. It says it is validating the visual 1 object. This is the object name. It says warnings are errors because the warnings are errors option was checked. And then let's see. So the first rule set it runs, because this is a visual 1. The first rule set is generic. And in fact, this will be the only rule set checked for this object LOD type. So it says the mesh has n-gons. Now, this means that the object has at least one face which has more than 4 vertices. The Arma P3D format cannot store faces with more than 4 vertices. It can only store triangles or quads. So it is physically, well, not physically, but this is impossible to write these LODs. So this will not export whatever you do. So to fix this, we can actually look at the model and we can see that I conveniently created 2 n-gons. So this face, while looks like a square, we can see that it has one morph point, which makes it an n-gon. It has 5 points. What we can do is actually just dissolve this point and then run the validation again, and that will be done. Now the next point is has materials with non-ASCII characters. And it also says that the first material encountered with this is the material called material. So if we go to the materials tab and look for the name it mentioned, we can look at the paths, and sure enough we can see that I typed a non-ASCII character into the path. This is again a problem for P3Ds, so keep your file paths to ASCII, as in English Latin characters. Same for vertex groups. It says has vertex groups with non-ASCII characters first encountered, and now this is actually the name that's the issue. So if you go to the vertex groups, you see I typed the same 4 characters and it has a non-ASCII character in the middle, and that will be a problem in the P3D. And then the same thing has name properties with non-ASCII characters. So in the name properties, this is also an issue. If you go to the LOD properties, name properties, you can see that I have a non-ASCII character in the name of the name property. This is also an issue. And then we can also see a warning, which is not by default an error, but since we ran this as warnings are errors, even if this was the only thing, that would still mean the validation failed. So this says that the mesh has more than 2 UV channels. If we go check on the UVs, we can see that it indeed has 3 UV channels, not just 2. Now, technically the P3D format can store any number of UV channels, more or less, but the game will misbehave or models will misbehave if you have more than 2 UV channels on them. Special LOD types like geometries might probably just simply break if you have more than 2 UV channels on them. So the best to avoid. So this is the generic rule set. This will be run for every LOD type that you try to validate. So let's go on to the next one, which will be the shadow LOD. So let's see. We have this beautiful cube, and let's run the validation, and of course it failed. So let's see what errors we have. It says the generic rule set did not throw any errors, which means that all of these errors are not an issue, so we don't have any of these on the model, but the shadow volume specific rule set failed. So it says the first one, the mesh is not contiguous. What this means is that it has holes, and sure enough, I actually deleted one of the faces. So if I was to close this, that would make the mesh contiguous again, closed. So this would pass. Next option is mesh is not triangulated. Now this is again a problem for shadow LODs specifically. They have to be triangulated. So this is obviously not triangulated, so I would have to either add a triangulation modifier during export or triangulate it by hand. The mesh has smooth edges. This is again shadow LODs. They must be flat shaded, so you would have to either assign the the edges as sharps, or if you don't want to do that, you can simply go and press type in flat shade, and this will also fix it. And then mesh has materials assigned. That is again problem for shadow LODs. So I have a material and I should not have a material with it. You can simply, well, you shouldn't have any materials assigned to them, but the issue is that they have actual textures or are VMATs. So either you delete just the path or preferably you delete the entire material, and that will be fixed. And then it has 2 warnings. It says unconventional shadow resolution. So this means that if you check, it actually says it, so shadow resolution 1. Now, the 2 shadow LODs that we have in game, or are used in game, should be the first one resolution 0, and then the second one is resolution 10. So resolution 1 will throw a warning saying that this is not an expected value. It is not an error, but it is unexpected and might not behave the way you want. And then the second warning says disabled by property LOD no shadow 1. And frankly, or clearly, I did indeed add the LOD no shadow property to the shadow volume, which would make it basically invalid. The game would not use it for shadow generation, so we'd have to remove this, and then if we revalidate, and we still have an option. Oh yeah, I didn't fix this. And if we revalidate, we can see that now we passed it, so this is fixed. Next one. The next rule set is called POINTCLOUD, so I just created a memory LOD, and let's see what this throws. I validate, it fails, and it throws basically two errors. The generic passed, the POINTCLOUD failed. So it says POINTCLOUD contains edges and faces. I mean, and then sure enough, we have a cube that has edges and faces. So to fix this issue, all you would have to do is just delete those and leave only the points. And if we revalidate, this is passed now. Next rule set is the geometry rule set for geometry LODs. So let's see what it shows us. If we validate this piece, and I mean, veteran modders will already know what the problem will be here. So let's go through the errors. says the mesh is not contiguous. This is the same error as the shadow LOD had. So this means there is a hole in the model, and yes, the bottom face is missing. So let's quickly close this. Next error says mesh has no component selections. This means that I did not create the vertex groups needed for all the components. So we can actually just click on find components and it will create the selection. Mesh is not convex. Now, this mesh is very much not convex, and we can actually check this by going to the object builder menu at the top, convexity, and find non-convexities, and this will actually highlight the edge that is not convex, and in this case it is very obvious which one it is. So the two options we have is we either have to make the mesh convex like this, but this might not be acceptable. The other option we have is to make a convex decomposition, so we will have to cut up the mesh into convex parts like this, for example. Wrong side. So now these are two closed components. If we actually shade them fast, smooth, you can see that these are two separate components. And now if we run the convexity check, it actually does not highlight any non-convex edges, so that's fine. Next point, mesh has no vertex mass. To fix this issue, we need to use the vertex mass editing panel. There is a separate video on how to do this, but to quickly fix this issue, I'll just set 1 kilogram on this entire object. So do check out the video that talks about this panel specifically. That's the end of the errors. The next two are warnings, so the mesh is not triangulated, convexity is not definite. This is just a warning that if you have flat faces, then it doesn't really matter if it's triangulated. But if you have a face that is not flat, so for example in this case this face is not flat, this means that the convexity check depends heavily on how the triangulation works under the hood. So this will just warn us that the the convexity check might not be accurate based on the model. So for the geometry LODs, it's best to triangulate them usually to avoid these issues. And then the last warning is the mesh has has vertices with no vertex mass assigned. This was an issue because the mesh had no vertex mass assigned. So this is fixed now. And if we run the validation again, it says passed. So that's for the geometry LODs. And most of these checks, except for the vertex mass, are true for all other geometry types. So phi geometry, view geometry, physics geometry, and so on. So the next one is the roadway. This is very obviously, again, very wrong, but let's validate this. So it throws one error and two warnings. So it says that the mesh has no faces. Well, obviously, since this is just a point cloud. And then the mesh has more than 255 points. The animations will not work properly. And then the mesh has no sound textures assigned. So the first error is very clear, I imagine. So the issue is that these are points. So to fix this, we would actually have to like create a proper mesh. So this would be a valid roadway, a face mesh. And then the next one is that it had more than 255 points. Now this obviously only has 4. The high point density in roadways might be a problem if you try to animate the roadway LOD. So the animations might, or the roadway itself might break if you try to animate above 255 points. And then just a warning that the roadway has no surface texture assigned. This might be an issue because the roadway LOD defines the footstep sound when you walk on the surface. So you want to make material here and then probably add some sort of surface material which would be in the P drive on data F surfaces. and then something.paa, and I just realized I put it into the RVMet, so this is a textures field. And then if we validate, this passed. And then the last one I wanted to showcase is the pathways. So if you validate this, it throws 2 errors and 1 warning. It says the mesh has no faces and the mesh has no entry points assigned. So obviously this is again 4 points. It doesn't have a face, so let's create a quad. So this would fix the no faces. And then the mesh has no entry points, so it has no selections for entry of the AI onto the path. So if I added a new selection called in01 and assigned a point to it, that would make it go away. And then there is a warning that the mesh has no position points assigned. So then I would probably like these 3, like this point I would assign as pos 01, and that will make the warning go away. And as you can see, that all the validations passed again. So this is basically how the validation works. You can read up on the documentation page about each and every rule set that exists. As I said, at least the generic rule set is run for every LOD. So if a LOD fails the generic rule set, it fails basically everything. And another note is that these checks do surface level checks most of the time. So not every error might be caught by them. Obscure problems might go unnoticed. But these validation checks usually help catch most of the issues that are frequently occurring during the creation of these LODs. I hope you will find the validation tool useful. It is also integrated into the P3D export. Watch the video on that one. And thank you for watching.